Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to kick off today's session. This is the Impact Makers session, a monthly virtual gathering for nonprofits focused on climate action, climate justice, and the environment, as you guys may or may not know. Today, our session is called The Climate of Fundraising. So my name is Holly Sarkissian, and I work as a fundraising consultant with climate and environmental organizations, helping them raise money and expand their impact, like our panelists today. You may have heard this shocking statistic that environmental nonprofits only receive 2% of total philanthropy. And according to a ClimateWorks Foundation study, this philanthropy did grow by 25% in 2021, but remains stagnant in 2022. And we're waiting to see, the analysis for 2023. But that's why our work, the work of fundraisers and galvanizing this money is so important. And that's also why I'm a huge fan of Rhonda's organization, Earth Gives. Earth Gives is pushing to galvanize this giving beyond 2% by hosting the only US-wide giving day specifically for climate and environmental nonprofits. So they use their platform for storytelling and inviting engagement with organizations like yours to elevate climate and environmental solutions. So actually, registration for nonprofits for Earth Gives Day will be opening in March or April. So stay on the lookout for that, and we hope you'll consider joining this effort. So it's clear that winning fundraising strategies are needed to push environmental philanthropy beyond 2%. This is why I am thrilled to introduce our panelists today. They will share their insights with you, and then we will invite you to ask questions and even share your own ideas. So the first panelist I will introduce to you is Eric Reif. He leads Blue State's global paid media practice as their senior vice president. He has launched first-of-a-kind marketing campaigns, built teams to run complex programs in a short window and high-stakes environments, and raised hundreds of millions of dollars for democratic campaigns, progressive causes, and nonprofits. He previously worked with East Street Group, where he was the managing director of the digital strategy team and generated hundreds of millions of dollars for organizations including Senator Elizabeth Warren's presidential campaign, National Women's Law Center, President Barack Obama's 2012 re-election campaign, and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. You may see in the background of his Zoom frame references to some of these campaigns. He has also overseen corporate social responsibility, advocacy, and public affairs campaigns for clients, including McDonald's, Covered California, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Our next speaker is Susan Swern, and she has been in nonprofit fundraising for more than 35 years. For the past 5 years, she served as Philanthropic Partnerships Officer with Global Greengrants Fund, a leading international grassroots environmental justice funder who you guys might have heard of. Susan has also served in leadership and consultant roles, championing many other causes, including child abuse and neglect, domestic violence, mental health, LGBTQI, and disability rights. Her newest venture is the Pickleball for Good Fund, to bring the sport to under-resourced and under-championed communities while promoting environmental sustainability in the industry. Their motto is, I love this, no planet, no pickleball. So we welcome Susan. Our next panelist is Len Gutman, and he is the Vice President of Philanthropy for Jewish Family and Child Services, and working to increase the organization's fundraising and marketing in the community. He has more than 30 years of experience in corporate communications, public relations, and fundraising. He is also the author of the book Giving Time, making a difference in your community. And he was a columnist and contributing writer to the Arizona Republic. I think he also mentioned spending some time working with the American Heart Association as we were getting on this call. So I'm sure there's a lot more experience he has to draw from in this presentation. What a great group we have. I am excited to kick it off. And with that, I'll pass over the mic to Eric to start us off.
Great. Thanks, Holly. Let me go ahead and share just a few quick slides I wanted to run through with everybody today. Let me know if folks can't see that. But yeah, thank you all for having me. Holly, thank you for that introduction. Rhonda, thanks for letting me join. I'm excited to be chatting with everyone today. As Holly mentioned, I'm Eric Reif. I'm the SVP of Paid Media at Blue State. For those of you who haven't met Blue State before, we are a purpose-driven agency working primarily with nonprofits, political campaigns, and advocacy organizations. And our focus really is on people and how we help partners make purposeful connections with their audiences and then drive those audiences to take action and build the world they want to believe in. As Holly mentioned, my background is originally in political campaigns, starting as an organizer back in 2006, and then have worked on campaigns for President Obama and Senator Warren at the DNC, and super PACs across all elements of advertising and online fundraising. And today, I want to talk a little bit about the 2024 election and how that may impact your donors and supporters and the work that all of you and your organizations are going to be doing throughout the year. It's become a bit of a cliche that in every election we say this is the most important election of our lifetimes. But the stakes for this year for our country, our democracy, for rights, for the planet really are higher than ever. And the political and media environments reflect those stakes. Grassroots and major donors are giving to campaigns and super PACs at record rates. The airwaves and the internet and newspapers are already absolutely saturated with election content, whether that's news or advertising, and will only become more so. And despite the fact that it is not even Super Tuesday yet, at least in the presidential race, we are effectively already in the general election. So this is going to be a long election year, and it's going to be unprecedented in many ways. We have one candidate for president who is on trial. We have AI advancing at a rapid and unregulated rate that will have impacts on how campaigns and actors, good and bad, communicate with voters. There's a lot going on. So what does that mean for nonprofits and for nonprofit fundraising in particular? First, the competition to get donor eyeballs on any organization or any individual fundraising solicitation is going to be extreme. Campaigns, super PACs, other political groups will be aiming to raise tens or hundreds of millions of dollars from donors across the sort of large to small donor spectrum. That's going to have a massive downstream impact on everyone else. After the 2020 election, we did an analysis with one of our larger humanitarian nonprofits by matching their donor file to publicly available contribution data from the Federal Election Commission. And what we found is that this segment of political donors gave, on average, 65% less to that organization in 2020 than they had the prior year. When we zoomed in on email fundraising in particular, those donors gave 45% less year over year, with a pronounced drop-off beginning in September and continuing even past Election Day through to the end of the year. So what this analysis has led us to understand is that, at least to some extent, many donors do think about their giving as a zero-sum game. The amount they're giving to campaigns over the next 10, 12 months that they may have already given already is, in some cases, going to come out of what they might otherwise consider giving to another organization. Second, to put my advertising hat on a little bit, the investment in paid media is only going to increase over the course of the year. By some accounts, election advertising in the 2024 cycle, so starting from last year and running through now, has already surpassed previous entire elections. I have seen projections for total advertising spend by November that are as high as $17 billion. That won't all be national. Much of it is going to be focused in a handful of key states. And when it comes to channel investment, broadcast and cable still reign. But the proportion of investment on digital channels, especially digital video and CTV, but including channels like search, like paid social, where we're able to do a lot of direct fundraising, is only going to increase, and that will have further impacts on cost and availability for everybody, not just political campaigns. And lastly, above and beyond the actuality of what happens and dollars that are directly getting diverted to campaigns, the 2024 election is going to be a defining moment for the year to come. Exhaustion, donor exhaustion, voter exhaustion, personal exhaustion, almost certainly is going to be the narrative going into the rest of November and December, no matter what actually happens on election day. And there are multiple potential outcomes of the election that could impact our work. A Republican victory could lead to a surge of interest and activism, as many organizations saw in 2016 and early 2017. If there's an unclear result, there will almost certainly be a continuation of that exhaustion, endless commentary, debate, anger, which may make it more challenging to break through in November and December. The air will just get sucked out of the room. Or even if there's no major hiccups, we have kind of a business as usual, everything goes normally, election result. The hope of a less turbulent November and December, certainly possible. But even then, with the audience who have finished a marathon and are looking forward to some respite, right as we're expecting to ramp up our fundraising efforts. So what do? I think it's important to keep two questions top of mind. First, we should put ourselves in our audience's shoes. If we can agree that election exhaustion is going to continue to be a theme, how do we challenge ourselves to push maybe a little harder and really reach for that emotional relevance with our audience? And second, if we also agree that we may get fewer opportunities to message to donors with a focus on the election, how do we make the opportunities that we do get as impactful and substantial as possible? So there's a couple things here. And to start, I think empathy is often the most important or most powerful, but least frequently used psychological tool in marketing and in donor development. We have repeatedly seen in our work with nonprofits that audiences can react really positively to messages of hope in tough or dark times. And I'd encourage all of you in your organizations to be that beacon of hope. Tell refreshingly positive stories, tell them in surprising ways, and do that in a way that drives breakthroughs in attention and recognition. That can often feel like it is at odds with reality, certainly at odds with the threats that we are facing nationally, regionally, and globally. But stories that appreciate and understand where donors are and paint a better way forward can really resonate. To the extent that it feels different from what you might normally be doing or what your audience might be used to seeing, that can also be an opportunity to really let the creativity of that message work for you. Next, and putting my advertising hat back on again, given what we know about this being a long slog of an election, there's an argument for stronger investment in donor and supporter acquisition earlier in the year, but really right now, before the full impact of the election hits as we get closer to around Labor Day. And be smart about where you're spending too. Many of your donors may be in swing states. I would bet that there are a portion who won't be. Greater efficiency may be found in some of those less competitive places. And really don't be afraid to be aggressive when you're winning and more timid when not. Look for opportunities where something's really popping, a message, a moment, and double down and make investments when your audience interest and incoming dollars are really at that peak. And then finally, use the next few months wisely when thinking about both growth and stewardship of your donors. And ask questions like, how do we make an impactful, positive impact on banking revenue now, or on the relationships that we have with some of our most important, highest value donors? Are there steps that we can take beyond what we're already doing to get noticed, especially with that higher value tier of donor? Can we push or upsell donors at all levels into monthly giving, automatic recurring giving as almost a risk mitigation strategy? It's all about using the time we have now to make decisions that will have long-lasting impact. So with that, I'll pass it back to Holly. Thank you again for having me. I think we will have some time for Q&A at the end after the other presenters have shared some thoughts. But also, if you think of anything afterwards, please feel free to reach out to me directly.
That's great. Thank you so much, Eric. I will pass the floor to Susan now.
Thanks, Holly. And of course, thank you, Rhonda. You're beloved in our community for everything that you bring to it and all of your support of us collectively and individually. So you're one of my sheroes. And as well as everybody else on this call, because having been in this career for 35 plus years, I'm considered one of the dodo birds, that I actually stayed in the lane of fundraising. I never wanted to be an executive director or a CEO and go off and do something else. Although I've had several roles. I've been a staff person, from a development director of one to managing or leading, I wouldn't say managing, leading a 5-person, 6-person team at the Kemp Foundation for the prevention and treatment of child abuse, which I might say I don't champion child abuse and neglect. I champion the prevention and treatment of child abuse and neglect. Just wanted to clarify that, as if it needed it. And then I've been a consultant, mostly for startup nonprofits. So bringing systems and a mindset framework, and then training the person to take over that role. And then most recently, I was involved in 2 political campaigns. One of them was my sister's campaign to run for district attorney in Brooklyn. And she came in second. She was very proud of that. But for her, fundraising was like a sharp stick in the eye. And for me, it's my happy place. And so I know that there's a mindset shift for a lot of people in this field of why fundraising could be a 4-letter word for some of us, and one begins with an F and the other begins with an L, because I love it personally. And most recently, as we mentioned, I work with Global Greengrants Fund, which is one of the leading international intermediary funds for environmental justice movement building. And so a lot of what I was going to think about, like what would be most relevant for you all today for me to talk about, might be the exact opposite of what Eric just shared, which was awesome. Green Grants particularly has been a major gifts-centric organization. And although it's a lower percentage of individual donors, it's primarily family foundations, larger foundations, donor advised funders, and a smaller amount of what we would call annual fund donors. And so some of the strategies that we've used tend to pivot towards high touch. And so it isn't the digital space. I mean, we have social media, and we send out newsletters and an annual report that just became digitized. But a lot of my role as a philanthropic partnership officer and everybody else is to have one-on-one relationships. And so I wanted to speak a little bit to that, not discounting why an annual fund of donors that might not be at your, it used to be 80-20. 80% of funding would come from 20% of your funders. And now it's getting to be 90% is coming from 10%. In some organizations, it's 95% coming from 5%. And so as much as we want to democratize and decolonize philanthropy and fundraising, the reality is do you major your time and your effort and your money and your budgets to those 20%, 10%, 5%, or do you democratize it? And I think part of that answer is why else do you have these donors? Are they champions that need to invite other people to learn more? In our case, environmental justice was not a buzzword, when I came on board as much, and now it is. The intersection between justice, whether it's racial, gender, sexual orientation, indigenous people and youth, versus environmentalism that is more about not the rights piece of it. So here at Global Greengrants Fund, it's a very intersectional approach. So it isn't how many hectares of trees can we save or replant, it's who is managing that. Is it the indigenous population that have traditionally been great stewards and can sustain their livelihoods at the same time as saving the trees and the planet and the diversity of the ecosystem? So I would say when we were talking about some of the trends that I think all of us should pay attention to, but then personalize it to our organizations, because when you read about these great big trends, and it's like cats herding to the little pointer that's on the wall, and like, oh my God, AI, we should be using AI, or oh, we should, do all this kind of automation. I think that we also have to personalize what has been our ideal donor and what is their role beyond giving. Are they introducers to other people in their network? So peer-to-peer fundraising. Is it that they could do house parties? Is it that I'm a politically oriented organization and therefore their advocacy piece? And are they involved in contacting Congress people or city council members or things like that? And so I think a couple of other lessons, I just want to focus on lessons that I've learned through my career, is one of my mantras is, and I learned it from, I believe it was Lynn Twist, who started Pachamama organization, and she did fundraising in Ethiopia, one of the poorest countries on the planet, and she did fundraising in Ethiopia. And she, during a, she did the Soul of Money is with a book she wrote, and then there's the Soul of Money and the Soul of Fundraising. And one of the things she said to me is, our job as fundraisers is not to grab a bigger piece of that pie, that limited pie, it's to grow the pie. So our job is not always that the money is going to come to us, but if we can widen the donor mindset that they do have enough funds to support, especially if you're working in a local community, that you're not the only game in town, but how you can collaborate with others, especially in the environmental space, because we're all trying to do ultimately the same thing. We're trying to save our planet. We're trying to save our people. We're trying to save the wildlife. And so I don't see us as a competition. I see it as where we should be trying to grow the pie of philanthropy in the environmental justice, in the environmental space, along with other nonprofits that might be allies or collaborators. At Greengrants, we're part of the Klima Fund, which has 4 major grassroots funders, part of it. And we don't see it as competition. We see it as this entity is able to get out information in a very excellent way, and then we all benefit equally in the money that gets channeled from that. Another thing was the notion of blessing and releasing donors. How many of us have databases that probably have about 20% are the most engaged active databases, and yet we keep them on, we spend money on direct mail, or if we don't do direct mail because we're trying to save the planet, we're using digital power for that. And so my recommendation is bless and release. If they have not been in touch with you, they do not open your emails, then just say they found other things. While there are arguments for lapsed donor campaigns, I also think it's an internal mindset. Don't take it personally. And if you need to bless and release them, spend your time with better prospects. That's what For Impact, if you're familiar with that model. And then persistence. To me, I focus on the inner fundraiser as much as I focus on fundraising strategies, because there's high burnout in this field. So how do we do self-care is, I think, a top of the mind thing for me. And I'm part of the organizational care initiative of Greengrants. And I think it's really critical that whether you're talking about your fundraising committee, whether you're talking about your directors of development, if you're talking about your major gifts officers or your annual fund, I think that we as a collective need to also do the self-care as we're taking care of the planet. In some of the donor trends that we are particularly looking at is the intergenerational wealth transfer. We're looking at donor advised funds, the increase in how many philanthropists are using those as vehicles. And then use of AI, the ethics of it, as well as whether groups are relying on it too heavily instead of the individuation and the personal touch and the personal visits. And then also a big thing for Greengrants, as we hired the For Impact. If you're not familiar with them, go to their website. I think it's forimpact.org. I don't think it's .com, but I could be wrong on that. And they offer a framework of, one of their sayings is, impact drives income, not income drives impact. And what that means is, if your board or your staff is saying, we can't do that because we don't have enough money, they're saying, no, you need to have the message that assume the money will follow when you can communicate concisely and impactfully what your outcomes and impacts are, not your activities, but what is your literal impact in this space. And if it's movement building where there's not a direct metric, that's okay. We need to educate donors that it may not be how many hectares, it may not be how many laws were passed. Because when you're talking about this movement, this international global environmental and environmental justice movement, it isn't always going to be a quantitative metric. And we have to feel comfortable about that and how we're communicating that to our prospective funders as well as our current donors. And so that was a really important process for Greengrants because we're so complicated in what we do. And then the other part within the philanthropic space is the whole democratizing and decolonizing philanthropy and the whole integration of equity, not just racial equity, but all the different isms that are out there, homophobia, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia. And how do we not only do that from our donor pool of people who are donors to us and reach out to those, be more inclusive, but also in our staffing, and also in terms of the values that we embody and how public are we about these values at a time when DEI is being lambasted in the public forum, but how we as environmental people, we should have a justice lens, I think, in what we do, because our planet could be physically healthy, but if not everybody on the planet has the right livelihoods and the right way of getting rights and is not embraced for who they are, then I don't think we really have the healthiest planet that we really are looking for and what the younger generation is seeking.
Thank you so much, Susan. And I think it's great that you highlighted trends both externally, impact driving investment, as well as internally, how to authentically incorporate equity into an organization's work and also take care of yourself to prevent burnout. A lot of good points there. I will pass the floor over to Len.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Holly. I sat down this morning and thought about what I wanted to say in my 5 minutes. And I wanted to just, there's so much to talk about in this field. I just wanted to highlight some trends and talk about some specifics in a couple of different areas of fundraising. So mine's going to be a little bit more granular than what we just heard, but hopefully there's some value here for you all. I don't know what level of fundraising all of you are at. So if there's some stuff here that's pretty obvious, forgive me, but you never know. Sometimes it's good to reiterate this stuff. I will say also, just real quickly, I am Vice President of Philanthropy for Jewish Family and Children's Service. We're a $45 million a year revenue organization in Phoenix, primarily doing behavioral health and other social services things, including domestic violence and foster care. I came to philanthropy later in my career. I spent the first half of my career in public relations and marketing for mostly Fortune 100 companies, and then found myself at the American Heart Association in my mid-40s, learning how to be a fundraiser on top of that. And I will say that the skill set is almost the same. So it's been very rewarding, and I love being in fundraising. I'm actually in fundraising and marketing, ironically, is where I ended up. Essentially the chief marketing and fundraising officer for this organization. Prior to here, I was at Special Olympics, and like I mentioned, the American Heart Association. Those are both national organizations. I was in both local and national roles. So a couple of things. My work today involves strategy development for the entire Jewish Family and Children's Service organization. And our subsidiary, which is a domestic violence shelter. We do events, we do individual gifts, we do grants, we do direct mail and direct email. And of course, I lead marketing as well. I would like to just focus on a couple of trends. There's a lot of trends, but I just want to talk about a handful that I've seen that I think are impactful. First of all, donors are aging. And I don't think there's any surprise, given where we are in the silver tsunami. Of people in the boomer generation getting older and close to retirement, if not retiring. That's important as you're looking at who your donors are. For us, for example, 90% of my donors are 70 and older. And that's just rough. But for them, we think about legacy gifts. We'll get a table purchase at an event, but what I need to do now with those donors is get them hooked up for planned giving for when they're no longer with us. Now that takes some time to build. If you're newer in your organization, to get somebody to commit to a legacy gift is difficult. But if you've been around for a little while, you should be having those conversations with your donors about legacy, given the demographics of our donor base. Also, individual giving is down generally. Eric mentioned that in his remarks. I believe that has a lot to do with tax laws. It's more people are taking the standard deduction now than ever before because of the tax laws, and that some people are drawn to donating because of that, because of the tax benefits, and so there's no getting around that. It's just a reality. Then, I spoke about older donors, but I will say this about younger donors. In general, they care about two things: engagement and ROI. They want to know about the impact of what you're doing. In fact, and they want to get their hands dirty. So, I mean, involved in your organization. They just don't want to, they don't want to go to galas and write a check. That's just not their thing. And that is part of the, I read an amazing book, forget who it was by, but it was about the intergenerational wealth movement from the Rockefellers and the Fords and all those to their grandkids' generations. And it's a different way of thinking in the younger generation for these donors. Also, you will have a lot more success with younger donors with small recurring gifts. And there's nothing wrong with that. You just need to sign them up. There's absolutely nothing wrong with a $20 a month donation that builds alignment to your organization. It allows you to plan better for what's coming in. And it eventually can lead to major gifts from those donors. You see it all the time. I don't know about you, but I see a commercial for St. Jude every day, and they want $20 a month. And it's very compelling, $20 a month. You barely feel it, but it's $240 a year. It adds up. So young donors, small recurring gifts, very important. Also, we're in a polarized society, and what we're seeing is things that you wouldn't ordinarily think are controversial now. I mean, it's one thing if you're raising funds for Planned Parenthood, you can expect that to be controversial, but things like birth control are controversial now. Things like the environment are controversial. Now, you might look at your donor base and say, well, I'm not going to go out and try to raise funds from the Republican National Committee for my environmental cause. But if they're in the Western US, even if they're conservative, they probably care about water. So you got to find ways to target your audience based on pieces of issues without trying to be too broad and causing controversy. Because I'm all in favor of controversy. Ask Rhonda. I'm about as controversial as they come sometimes with my opinions. But if you're in fundraising, you can't. You don't have that luxury. I've had donors walk away from us because we had a speaker at an event that said something negative about Fox News. Okay, well, she was right, but it made some donors mad. Look, I'll say this about digital solicitation, and the trend continues to grow. It's very powerful, especially on a big global scale, like what Eric was speaking about, and politicians in general. I will say, though, that there's a little bit of online fundraising fatigue happening in the industry. And, you see it, for a while there, it was really interesting. You saw a lot of your friends on Facebook raising money for whatever causes. And now you see it so much, you're like glossing over it. So that peer-to-peer stuff where I'm going to be walking in the Heart Walk, or this walk, or that thing, please sponsor me. It's harder to get those donations now. So be wary of online fundraising fatigue. Don't not do it, but be wary of it because it is a real thing. I want to talk about collaboration. I think there's so many nonprofits doing similar work, and if you can find ways to collaborate with similar organizations, you're going to have more impact. This is one of the reasons I think Earth Gives is such an important idea. I see it all the time. You can work together and split the funds, and it's powerful stuff. Someone else mentioned donor advised funds. I will mention it in the sense of donor advised funds are a way that individuals are giving, and there is still a lot of anxiety around the rules. You can put your money in a donor advised fund, and you do not have to give out 5% a year like you do in a family foundation. That's going to continue to cause pushback, that people are using it as a tax haven and not for charitable purposes. We're seeing the state of California, for example, fighting back. You should just for now consider donor advised funds as just a way that individuals give, and keep it as part of your individual giving plan, but you really can't target donor advised funds. And then last but certainly not least, I want to mention the trend of AI because it's come up now, but both speakers, I don't want to scare you, but I promise you ChatGPT can write a grant proposal or an LOI in seconds, not hours. That's just as good and can win you awards. I'm not suggesting that everybody do this, but I want you to know this is changing. I happened to watch a video last night on YouTube about a brand new Google tool called Notebook LM. It is a personalized AI tool. And I immediately thought, oh, well, if I fed all of my previously written grants into this AI and then asked it to write another grant, it would be 10 seconds. I'd have a perfect grants application. So there are use cases for AI that makes sense to start using now, because it's going to save you time and it's going to be appropriate. I'm not quite sure if I'm ready to get my grant manager to use Notebook LM. She might freak out that we're going to replace her with it. But if you think about it in ways of enhancing your work and not, like, if she can write a grant in 30 seconds instead of 3 hours, she can write more grants. That's the way I think about it as her boss. So that's good. So those are kind of the trends that I'm seeing. I also wanted to give you a couple of takeaways, sort of my big three about fundraising today. The first is relationships. I think you have to think about fundraising as relationship building. In many ways, that is like PR. Your biggest tool for fundraising should be your cell phone or face-to-face. It just is. It's just a fact. Relationship building is how you get to major gifts. Second big takeaway for me is diversity of revenue streams. You've got to approach people differently. That means whether you're going to do events, you're going to do individual gift, major gift fundraising, grants, whatever it is, you got to do it all to some extent, or you're missing opportunities. So diversity of revenue streams, and then process. I'm really, really crazy about process. I want to go into a little bit more detail about that in a second here. So let's talk about events real fast. I just want to talk about events, individual gifts, and grants. Overview real quick, couple of just points, and then you guys can ask questions later. So we're getting smaller with our events, not bigger. We're only going to get 300-400 people in a room for a luncheon or something. It's sort of static, and we're going to raise the same amount every year. We're doing smaller salon events more now, where we're friend raising as much as fundraising, and then that grows, right? So with events, I recommend you stick with a model that works for you. Find one. Either you're going to sell tickets to your event, or you're going to do a Benavon style event where you invite everybody for free and hope they give. It's confusing to donors if you switch it up, or if you're doing multiple things. Pick one, stick with it, and year over year you should see a nice increase. I don't have a preference for whether Benavon style or a paid event is better. When I got to Jewish Family, they were using a bit of a hybrid model where they were selling tables and doing an ask in the room. I'd never seen that before. I'd never seen it work very well, but we just finished our event. I sold 45 tables for $2,500 each, and I made another 50,000 in the room that day. So, I guess hybrid works too, but whatever it is, the model, you really should stick with it. Corporate sponsorships are fabulous for event. It's a great way to get events to grow more money. We don't have a lot of corporate sponsors, and that's an area we want to improve. Essentially, those table events or those galas or those luncheons or breakfasts, those are individual gift opportunities to grow your donor base. And if I have one person come that buys a table and they bring 9 people that have never heard of us before, that's a home run. So again, that's sort of, I think of those events as individual gift oriented. Same with golf events and polar plunges and walks and runs. You can get corporate sponsors for those, but it's really about individual cultivation. I'm shocked at how many times I see somebody's event and see a budget where the ROI or the ratio is like 50%. If you're higher than 30% on cost to raise the amount you raise, you shouldn't be doing an event that costs you that much to raise a certain amount of money. So I look for even less than 30%. 30% is like the high end. You know, if it costs you $30,000 to raise $100,000, you're about at the top. If it costs you $50,000 to raise $100,000, your money's better spent elsewhere. Also, when it comes to events, because the donor base is younger, you don't have to have a formal event anymore. You don't have to wear a black tie. You don't have to have gowns. There's some events like that. Those are old school. I know they're old school. They're boomer oriented. I'm so close to being a boomer, but I'm not. You know, I like the one here in Phoenix that I think is exceptional is the Phoenix Children's Hospital Beach Ball. Their event is essentially bathing suits and t-shirts, and it's a blast. So think about it that way. Make sure you're using a low-cost fundraising tool. You shouldn't be spending $5,000, $8,000, $10,000 for Give Smart or Classy anymore when there are very, very low cost or free tools that do the same thing or better. We use QGive, which is $25 a month for fundraising online, and we integrate it with our donor database, Bloomerang, which is a third the price of our previous donor database. We used to use Razor's Edge. It was the bane of my existence. I just switched to Bloomerang. I'm saving my company $25,000 a year just in donor database savings. But the other one, if you're not using QGive, is Give Butter. I highly recommend Give Butter if you're starting out. It's free. I know that's hard to believe. It's free and it works and it does everything. Ticket sales, auctions, CRM, event management, all of it. And it's free and it's really, really good. Give Butter, San Diego-based company. Also, don't
1 minute warning.
Okay, thanks. Text to give, don't discount it. It's hard to get donor cell phone numbers, but consider it because text to give works. At my event in January, we had about 50 people do the text to give in the room. Individual gifts, track. Use moves management. If you don't know what that means, is every one of your individual donors is in a cycle. They're either in introduction phase, cultivation phase. You've asked them for permission to make an ask. You've made an ask. You're stewarding them. You're starting over. There's plenty of if you don't know where your donor is in your phase, you're missing opportunities with your donors. Every one of your major donors should be in a moves management system. If you can't afford Bloomerang or Razor's Edge, use a free one like Give Butter. If you are not comfortable making asks of individuals, get comfortable. I recommend the book The Ask by Laura Fredericks. I got to meet Laura when I was at the Heart Association, and her book it's great for asking for anything, fundraising or friends' favors. It's really great. Let me skip ahead here since I'm running out of time. I mentioned the monthly donors. Find your level of what's a major gift. Ours is $2,500 and up. They get to be a member of our giving society. We throw a little event for them every year. A couple of quickies on grants. Start in your local community and meet with them face to face. Unsolicited asks to large national corporations and the Ballmers and Waltons and Gates and Buffetts of the world. You're not ready for that unless you're the American Heart Association. Also, you got to have 3 years under your belt with a 501c3 and audited financials, and board governance is important. So if you might not be ready for grants yet, but once you are, that's about 60% of our fundraising is grants. Look at your local nonprofit alliance or organization. There might be some resources to find out who your donors are, your funders are in your community. And government grants, be careful. They can be lucrative, but they can also kill you with paperwork. It might not be worth it. So those are my tips.
Thank you so much. We've had a lot of wonderful trends I want to open the floor up to questions. First, I have a question to start it off. I wonder, in light of all the trends you guys highlighted, what in the fundraising world are you most excited about? What do you view as a big opportunity for people working in this space?
Well, I'll just jump in and say for me, it's the ability to interact with small groups of donors. I think that the reason we switched to more salons is because it's more impactful to be face to face with a small group of people, and you're building friends little by little. So that for me is something that I'm excited about. More small group work.
That's great, Len. I think in our space, being that it's the environment, the focus on next gen is the biggest opportunity, because again, it's not just about the money. It's about raising the awareness, activating campaigns if they're political or legal or resistance movements. And so I think that all of us, it behooves us. So how do we want to treat, what do we understand about the younger generation and their philosophy on giving? And also recognizing that a $10 gift, if they inherit money or they start their career off, when you've gotten them in your, whether it's a sustaining monthly kind of $10 a month, and you get them out the chute, they could stay with you for life. And so I think it's the quality of the relationship, not the quantity of the money that they're giving in the here and now. And unfortunately, a lot of times nonprofits don't take a long-term view of relationship building. And I do think we need to do that, especially with those that are younger. They may not have all the assets now, but they certainly have the passion for the environment. And we need to capitalize on that and channel that.
Yeah, I'd echo Susan. I mean, we have a lot of clients who 5 years ago, their average donor age was 65, and today their average donor age is 70. And, just like I think is hitting with a lot of the folks that we work with, that they have to be doing not just more, but be thinking differently and talking to audiences differently and being creative in a way that they, in talking about their mission in a way that they haven't been able to do previously, to really, I think Susan said it well, like build relationships, not just, have a transaction with that, with millennials and increasingly with Gen Z. So I think that's opening up a lot of opportunities in creative and targeting and everything that that folks are doing.
I just want to add that I'm launching a young professionals board right now for that very reason. I think we're just going to mimic our larger governing board, and I'm going to bring people under 40 in and get their ideas and have them help with fundraising. So that's one way we're working on that.
And
Stephen, I wanted to make sure we got other questions before we ran out of time. Stephen, you had your hand up, and they've been talking about you, invoking the younger generation. So what are your thoughts and what's your question?
Yeah, thanks so much. And I just wanted to say thank you all for sharing. This has been great. I got a couple of pages of notes going. My question, it's directed to something you brought up, Eric, about kind of hopefulness and empathy and inspiring. And I think there's been some debate at my org, and I know with other folks, about like what's the value of like that hopeful messaging, and then also kind of a brutal honesty messaging about that. There's a lot that's bad about the world right now. So if you could just speak a little more to that that tension and how to approach it, I'd love that. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a great point, because I think there is, especially for organizations in this space, like, we're steering down the barrel of a lot of the consequences of decades of bad decisions that are coming to a head now. I think there's a couple of things. One is that I think what I've often seen with both nonprofits and political organizations is that the doom and gloom, while it might be technically true, it starts to exacerbate that sort of feeling of exhaustion. I think especially in this environment and this political environment where there is going to be a lot of bad news every day, You know, no matter how you feel about any particular issue, there's going to be something that is, you know, like that is of concern or upsetting. And I think being able to sort of be that kind of beacon of light in the distance, while also not being, you know, or while being honest, I should say, about what is at stake, is going to be attractive and important to donor audiences. And then I think, you know, like you can be hopeful while also being honest and direct about the consequences too. It's a tricky needle to thread, but I think it's an important one.
And if I could add, Stephen, it's a great question, and Eric, yeah, you're spot on. I think when it comes to the environment, part of the gloom and doom has been presented as global. I think you need to make it local. That if you, and I think the power of questions is the other tip I would say. Oftentimes nonprofit throw up all over donors. They tell them what the problem is, what our solution is. And I think in my career, I've learned to ask the questions so I find out what they are thinking and their experience. So again, related to the environment, have you noticed you're having more rain? You're having less rain. You're having, you know, your garden isn't growing. You're not having bees, you know, in your garden. And so I think it's not a doom and gloom. It's saying, what is your personal experience? How does that connect to your mission and the solutions that you're trying to find? And it could be a national organization, but I think every part of our world is experiencing climate change differently. And so if we personalize the message that way by finding out what they're experiencing and then tailor our solution to what they've already know is the problem. And the power of questions, instead of talking and saying what we're all about, it's finding out more about who they are and what worries them. One of our favorite questions is, what keeps you up at night?
Great, thank you.
What other questions do people have?
Sabina, do you have a question, or Michelle? Sabina, I think you mostly run an you rely on a lot of volunteers, right? To get your work done. Do you have a specific question around that? You're on mute.
Sorry, no, I don't have any questions. I think this was a really great presentation. I was just typing actually that I have to hop off, but I really appreciate all of these highlights and trends and personal experiences that you all shared. I work for a very tiny nonprofit, and I'm a part-time fundraiser, and so there are many challenges that go with that. But I think everything you've talked about really aligns with what I've seen in my work with this organization over the past 5 years. So it's reaffirming, and it's good to start thinking about like the political year, because yes, that is of utmost importance, I'm sure.
Thank you. Joni, go ahead.
I'll let myself be seen. Oh, come here. There we go. Wait a minute. There I am.
There you
Okay.
are.
I move around a lot, so I go off screen just so I don't disturb people with my fidgets. But we're also a very small nonprofit. We don't really even have a staff. We have 4 part-time contractors that do pretty much all our work. I'm one of them, a half-time development director. I don't have a committee. I don't have any other helpers with this fundraising, and it's kind of overwhelming. We're getting into our first CRM. We're uploading all of our data from spreadsheets right now, and I'm just curious what you might suggest. We're an environmental nonprofit dealing with a mine in our community, 5 miles from our town center, that's going after critical minerals. This is the first manganese mine in the country, and there are no standards for manganese under the EPA, no regulations, and it's a toxic metal, as toxic as lead, and it's necessary for the green transition. So it's a terrible catch-22 as an environmental group, because we don't want to bash EVs, but that's what these batteries are for. And going after the minerals in an area such as ours with huge biodiversity that's going to be impacted. We have over 100 endangered, threatened, and sensitive species in our mountain where this mine is taking place. Best way to craft a message under these scenarios would be my ask at this point. Because remaining hopeful in the face of the onslaught we're dealing with massive despair in our community, and I need to flip that.
I mean, I have an opinion. I don't know if you'll like it or not, but there's a lot of there's a lot of false information out there about the value of electric vehicles in terms of their impact on the environment. And I think we're overselling as a society the shift to electric vehicles as a cure-all. And I think
I agree with that.
Yeah, and so I think softly or using facts to show why that we can't put our eggs in this basket, all of our eggs in this basket around electric vehicles and batteries, is probably a way to get people who maybe think, oh, the answer is electric cars. Well, it's not. That's a small piece of it. And you know, my son just got his degree in environmental sciences, and he's like, well, Dad, don't buy an electric car. Keep using the car you have until it falls apart, and then, you know, think about maybe a plug-in hybrid instead. So there's all these things that people don't think about in terms of the environmental impact of what everybody sort of thinks is the solution, and it's not. So I would be out there talking about that. Now, you know, we live in an area here where there's a lot of copper mining that had been done, and it destroyed parts of the state, and there's just no getting around it. Mining in general, it's a big issue. I don't know how we get around it. They're going to mess with the Salton Sea out in California now for battery stuff, and they're destroying parts of Africa. Tie yourself to the global issue, maybe.
Thank you.
Joni, we'll keep talking for sure. Susan and Eric, any final thoughts? Michelle, go ahead. Eric.
Does Michelle have a question? You go for it.
She looks like she did.
Well, I was typing, just thank you. I did have a question if there's time. But I was curious on just more resources in terms of AI. I've taken a handful of like little classes on that, and there's a lot of great resources, but I feel like there's very valid concern, and especially when it comes to fundraising with donor security and information with all of that. And just, I guess, yeah, your thoughts on the usefulness, but to what degree is it secure, and if we're giving donor information or anything over that, if we're utilizing it for different things, yeah, or what the future is of that is, and if you could talk a little bit on it if there was time.
But I certainly, yeah. Oh, go ahead, Eric.
Let's go. Let Eric.
Yeah, sure. I would say I would definitely, there's a lot of utility in generative AI. I would definitely exercise caution to the extent that you're putting any sensitive information into it, not just donor information, which I would definitely not feed into like a ChatGPT or similar. But even things that are sort of specific to your strategy or your communications necessarily. You know, anything that you put into the way that these large language models work is that they take all of the inputs go in that anybody puts into them go into refining and improving the models. So anything that you're putting into a ChatGPT, that's something that not just you, but your competitors can't necessarily directly access, but they may be able to get a better response out of the tool on the back of your hard work. You know, I think there is also I think these tools are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination yet, but they also make a lot of mistakes. And I think there has been some sort of under coverage or underestimation of how often these tools can get things wrong in a way that could be, either like ranging from suboptimal to really damaging to an organization, to its brand. This, I don't know if folks saw the slide that I had as the cover slide for this. One of my colleagues punched into DALL-E, which is the image generator. What's the most exciting image you can give me about the election? And it's a bunch of things where like the word election is spelled wrong. It's not even in English. It's just letters smushed together. So I would come down on the side of like really, really exercising caution to the extent that you're using Gen AI at all.
I know that we're running out of time, but I wanted to, I don't work for Google, but I would like to say that what I saw yesterday with Notebook LM is different than ChatGPT, in that with Notebook LM, you put the source material in, it only uses what you put in, and then it forgets it. So if you were to, for example, put in your previous grants that you had written into this, and then ask questions or ask it to write a new grant based on that, it would only use as source material what you put into it. And then when you close that notebook, it would be gone. It wouldn't be shared with anybody else. So that's one of the reasons I found it to be extremely powerful. You have to think about use cases. Use ChatGPT to rewrite your thank you letters to donors every month, because why not? It takes 5 seconds and it'll do it. You think about the use cases, but don't put donor data in there.
And the last thing I'll add is I would expand the conversation to just technology for fundraising too, not just AI, because there's so much other tech out there. And again, you got to weigh the cost and the benefit, and also who's your target audience. If you're doing major gifts, then a lot of automation doesn't make sense. But if you want to have a database of 10,000 individual donors and, the smaller givers, but yet you want consistent communication and engagement that way, then it could be very cost effective.
Artie, you hung out the entire time. Do you have a final thought, question? And then we'll wrap it up. You're on mute.
Sure. A final comment maybe about AI. I just, before a lecture the other day, I decided to ask through AI to generate examples of trophic cascades from pinnipeds, seals, walruses, etc., and sea lions. And I got back this really beautifully written set of examples of trophic cascades, and not one of them had to do with seals, walruses, lions. They'll just put the words in to replace the particular taxon or species or population that was there. So take it, double check and triple check, and don't really, when you're trying to do something using AI, you've got to be really careful. And of course, I would never put any kind of information about folks on our mailing lists or donor lists or whatever. It's the wrong place. And I guess the question to Lynn was, you said that LM, whatever that was, that once you close your computer, it's gone. How can you be sure?
Well, I mean, I think the type of learning model that the new Notebook LM that Google put out is it doesn't, from what again, I've only just seen this one 15-minute long YouTube video about it. You open a notebook, you add source material to it, you ask it questions, it creates what you're looking for it to create, and then you close that notebook, and that short-term memory goes away.
Okay,
so you're not.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's almost a private. It's almost like a private AI instance, and there are other services like that that are doing that. I think again, if you're gonna for grant writing, it made perfect sense to me. For drafting letters to donors, things like that. Yeah, it takes 5 seconds. Why do I? PR, I've written press releases with ChatGPT, and I've written articles that have appeared in magazines and newspapers around town that ChatGPT did the first draft on.
Wow. All right. Thank you.
First draft.
Holly, why don't you wrap us up?
Well, thank you all for this food for thought. I think it would be great if, Rhonda's going to make this recording available. And so we can all, absorb the lessons learned. And also I wonder if you guys are available for any follow-up questions, if people need help with their fundraising, want to bounce ideas off of you in the future.
Yeah, by all means, my email was on the last slide, but it's ereif@bluestate.co. Put it in the chat too, but definitely happy to chat with folks.
And I was going to ask Rhonda if, what your vision for it, because I think ongoing interactive stuff is really helpful rather than one-shot deals where we cram everything. And so if you find that the people who sign up for Earth Gives as recipients, if they feel they want an ongoing dialogue where it's not really like presentations, but it's like not ask the experts because they're experts in their own way, but if we can facilitate dialogue, and if that's a part of this connectivity that we have in trying to build this movement, then I'd volunteer for that on an ongoing basis.
Well, thanks. Yeah, these community commons are monthly for environmental nonprofits. And but the power hours that we hosted during the Giving Day last year with people like Bill McKibben and folks from the Climate Justice Alliance and elsewhere, we intend to continue and broaden that with, for the community who want to get started. And I see all of you in the nonprofit sector as the experts. You're the ones closest to the ground and the issues. And so bringing people closer to you who may not live in your neighborhood, but can be impactful after the knowledge that you share is sort of our hope. And so threading on the last session that I just had earlier this morning with women, it really was about this idea of community. Yes, we're trying to boost environmental philanthropy, but doing that through community. So connecting to one another, seeing one another, engaging with one another, lifting up, humanity and kindness and caring. We can only hope, Eric, if you can manage that through the campaign, that would be a huge goal to get everyone rallied to support democracy and all the good things that means in caring for our fellow humans and our fellow living beings on the planet. So yeah, that's the hope. Always open to partnerships and supporters and evolving this idea as we go. So thanks everybody for being here. I really appreciate your wisdom, and I wish you a good rest of the day. Holly, thank you so much for hosting. You're our very first guest host, so awesome work.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Nice to meet everyone.